Hello, welcome to Life in a New World, the magazine for foreign transplants who call New York home. I'm Tiziana Rinaldi. I'm here with Roberto Ragone, the owner and president of Ragone Enterprises and Productions. He's a graduate of Columbia University and the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. He has served in several positions at the New York City Mayor's Office, the City Council, and also as the executive director of 2 business improvement districts. And now, Roberto, you put your skills in business and governance at the service of artists, small companies, and nonprofits to help them realize their vision, particularly if they focus on Italian-American heritage and the immigrant experience.
That's correct.
What are your projects?
First of all, thank you for having me. It was great talking to you a while back on a podcast, and thank you for having me back. So my projects, a lot of them have to do with the arts and culture, the entertainment sector, particularly with exploring art, culture, and heritage, the immigrant experience. So for instance, I work, just to give you examples to take the abstract and make it concrete, I work with the United Pugliese Federation as one of my clients. Now this is an umbrella organization whose member organizations are organizations that promote the history and culture and heritage of the Puglia region of Italy, which is, I believe, the heel of the boot of the Italian peninsula.
That's correct.
That's right. And so that's one example. And then I'm also the co-chairman of the Vito Marcantonio Forum, which is an organization that explores the leadership of Congressman Vito Marcantonio, who represented Italian Harlem. The idea there is to get people interested in the history of Italian Harlem, which was once the biggest little Italy in the United States, and the role that Italian-American leaders played in getting the Italian-Americans to work together with African-Americans and Puerto Ricans and other groups that lived in that area for advancing an agenda like civil rights and fair practices, labor fair practices, and equality of opportunity. Then another example is 1% for Culture, which is an effort to advocate for, it's an initiative advocating that the city commit 1% of the municipal expense budget towards arts and culture. Because right now it's 0.22%, and we'd like to see it quadruple because of the role that arts and culture plays in education, in bringing communities together, in creating jobs, and in the economy. You know, immigrants, for instance, the role that arts and culture groups play in immigrant communities to give them a sense of themselves. So, and I could recall one particular perspective on this. Someone who was working with us on the impact of culture on immigrants. He's the deputy director of Flushing Town Hall. His name is Sammy. I want to pronounce his last name correctly. Shumace. And I remember him saying, and this is sort of important to this topic, to this theme, particularly for your show. So, for instance, he said that many immigrants tend to prioritize survival and success over culture in terms of how to spend their time, right? bringing food home to the table, getting a better job, right? Number two is that the city's funding tends to deprioritize, like we said, these and marginalize these kinds of cultural activities that are happening in the outer boroughs, and thus the immigrant communities, and so they're not valuing what they bring to the city in terms of jobs and education and
so what you're saying is basically what happens outside of the mainstream
exactly
still struggles to be valued, recognized, or even be noticed.
Now, yes, not only that, that's one side of the coin, but the other side is that there are cultural tourists that venture outside of Manhattan. For instance, I think there were studies as far back as the mid-2000s that said that many European tourists, for instance, and perhaps even those from Asia, when they come to the city, they're willing to venture out, beyond the very stereotypical tourist sites of New York City, like
and
the
Manhattan,
Empire State Building, exactly right, the Statue of Liberty, and go to these immigrant communities and explore these things. And even though the potential for the income that it brings to the city in terms of economic activity
and stimuli,
right? The multiplier effects and the revenues to the city hasn't quite recognized that, and then the third observation that Sammy made was that if you promote culture and involve the immigrant community in important, it helps assimilate them, gives them that self-esteem, and also enlists the broader New York, the American community to appreciate what immigrants bring to the table.
You just explained what the goals are of the organizations that you get involved with and the projects that you select. How do you help them achieve their goals? You have an extensive background, not only in history and business and government, but also you have a history of treasuring your own heritage. You're Italian American. How do you help? How do you bring all of your skill set to this?
And thank you for asking that. It's interesting. My motto, my mantra, right, that I have even on my business card is transforming vision to value. So that would be like the shorthand way of answering that question. But what that means is that I'd like to take an organization's mission or take the goals of a particular project and demonstrate how it has some kind of a universal application, a universal appeal to people who might, otherwise not have thought about that particular organization or project. And by doing that, the value might come in the form of, financial value, right? Because the goal might be looking to raise revenue, for instance, right? And fundraising is one role that I do, but also the idea of the advocacy and the marketing and the outreach, right? The intangible value of bringing people together and creating a sense of community behind the goal of a project or behind the mission of an organization, right? So at the end of the day, they all feel like I could relate to this, I could identify with this. I value this. So that's really what I try to do. And again, it goes back to those skill sets that I'm trying to use through broader strategic planning, fundraising, marketing, and advocacy.
Is this type of work, let's remain specific with the focused on the Italian American community, helping the Italian American community re-embrace or get back in touch with their heritage through the arts, because most of the time you tend to select works that use an artistic approach to delivering the message. Has this type of work been in greater demand?
Yeah, it has a mixed. There's a mixed signal about that. Right, it's a very good question, and I think that the way it plays out is that from the many years that I've sort of experienced Italian culture, it seems like there's more of an interest in learning the Italian language. There seems to be more programs out there offering the study of Italian language and culture, there is more of a presence of, let's say, the Italian entrepreneur, right? Or the people from Italy who are coming here now, who are not particularly coming here because they're poor, right? Or escaping some kind of persecution. They're actually looking for the freedom of choice in a very entrepreneurial way of what their career would be and what their lifestyle would be compared to constraints that might be set by the Italian economy. But their presence here, what they do is they create a climate that might get people, Italian Americans and others, interested in Italian culture. I think of, for instance, the New York Italians, right? There's that meetup group, the New York Italians. They host events. There's socializing. There's networking. There's language conversation sessions. There's community participation, volunteer projects. And then you think of the other meetup groups and how they tend to attract people who are interested in Italian wine or Italian food or Italian fashion or language or culture, literature. And from all ages and all backgrounds. So I'd like to think that if you use those as a gauge, there is interest. Whether those things are being institutionalized in a more systematic way in the universities or in how foundations or government prioritize funding is another story. So it's a mixed bag in that sense.
Let's talk about a little bit of the stereotypes and how their role, and how do you address them in your work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a perspective on stereotypes. So, for instance, there's a lot of concern, and there's a lot of some Italian organizations that advocate against the stereotypes, and I think that sort of like Shakespeare said something about all of life is a play and everyone has a role. It's not a direct quote, obviously, but so there's a role for those groups to stigmatize those people or those media organizations or commercials or what have you that perpetuate stereotypes. But I also think that I think that people embrace Italian Americans, for instance, and Italians, despite the stereotypes that are out there. And I've joked with people now I asked the question, is anybody really not falling in love with an Italian American or marrying one, right, because of some stereotype about our being dangerous or something like that, right? So the answer is no. However, I do think, unless you have absolutely no contact with Italians and you're completely buying into everything that you watch on TV, which is, I think, very isolated, that type of person. But I do think that the problem with the negative stereotypes is that when it's time to have a serious conversation about what Italians bring to the table of value, Italians and Italian American history, let's say, beyond food, festivities, and fashion, right? People don't take it seriously.
And what's the antidote that you use to counter, some of these biases, or to just spread information and to help possibly Italian American youth who might be affected by going out there in the world and hearing certain perceptions about the group they come from?
Right. It's for the Italian American youth and for young people in general. I think for Italian American youth, what's interesting is that there's this sort of a paradox where you can only appreciate, it seems as though, and I don't know if there's any study that's been done about this, but it seems as though that one way of getting them to appreciate Italian American history is to actually go back to Italy and visit Italy. And I think there is more of that, which answers your earlier question about the prospect, the potential. As they study the Italian language, or as they go back to Italy, and then beyond the years ago it was to be, I'm going back to Italy, but it was really Florence, Venice, and Rome. Now it's more about going back to Italy where their parents are originally from, where their grandparents or where their family tree is originally from, and then really feeling a sense of connection and saying, I got it. I mean, I've heard those anecdotes where they go back and they go, now I get it. Now I get why there's something, now I get my parents, now I understand my grandparents, now I understand how I bring something unique to the American experience. I'm proud of being an American, but I bring something to the table. And so that's one element of it. The other one is, it's ironic that you had Anthony Dorenzo in a previous show, because he and I had talked about this when I was helping him raise the money to publish his book, Trinacria, A Tale of Bourbon Sicily. We talked about cultural capital. So, social capital is about kind of building that credibility, among people. But cultural capital is getting people to building credibility about your culture and getting people to do that by either buying books or buying books as a gift to others, which is something that, for instance, the Italian American Writers Association does, whose founder, Robert Viscusi, I may be doing a project for kind of it's sort of like an emerging, fresh off the press. I'm promoting a book of his called Immigration, which is a book of sonnets that actually it reflects, each line in the many sonnets that are in this book represents the fragmentation and the shattering of a past that comes from having to make a life-changing, character-defining decision for an immigrant group, particularly in this case the Italians, having left Italy to come to the United States. So it's that kind of fragmentation that needs to be rebuilt. And so the language will do it, these meetup groups can do it, and the idea of having events, whether it's organized by Italian organizations or by others who are interested in Italian culture, that promote the books, right, the literature, the poems, the theater, something other than the food and the fashion and
what we're always known for.
What we're always known for, exactly. Which is easy, right, the easy stuff.
Getting people really interested in Italian culture in its broader perspective and in its broader offering.
Exactly.
And that ties into another question that I have for you, because I was wondering how closely does the Italian American community work with the Italian community here in New York, for example, or in the Bronx?
Sure. I mean, what I've noticed over the years, and I've been involved with the Italian community since I ran the Italian club in high school. So I just remember over the years, there's more of a presence of, let's say, there's an Italian representative at events. Someone, it might be from the consulate, right? And there's the Italian national anthem sung at these events more. Now, some of these are symbolic, but they're more distinctive than many years ago. I see these things. I would think the Italian government's involvement in funding arts and culture programs in the United States, it seems more prevalent now than many years ago.
Has increased.
Has increased, right? And exchange programs, right? And sort of Italian organizations like the National Italian American Foundation has had these exchange programs. I think that it's unclear how strategic and systematic that communication is, because there's a challenge. And I think that you might have even asked me about what the challenges are going to be, right?
Yes.
And one of them is that first of all, it's the fast-paced life since the internet, where young Italian Americans who are both generationally removed and geographically removed from Italy, and now have a faster paced life because of the internet and so forth, and social media and those distractions, they might they may have other things that make heritage deprioritized. But the other thing is this, that let's say African Americans and the Jewish community have a kind of an overarching vision about what their collective experience is. Right. And I think that is lacking in both for Italy and in Italian Americana, right? And I can't speak for these other countries like Canada and Australia, but I would think that there's some element of that everywhere because it's a diaspora. There's a fragmentation in the mainland, in the peninsula, and then there's this fragmentation that plays out in terms of organizational fragmentation. And so there's no rallying cry behind this is what it means to be originally from this peninsula, and along with Sardinia and Sicily, and who we are. And as long as that's lacking, right, then there's no call to action about what do we make a priority? Because it's an intangible. I think a lot of Italian Americans, for instance, even though they've achieved economic success, the tangibles, they don't need to prove those anymore. And they don't even need to some Italian Americans are still trying to prove that they're loyal Americans, even though it's above and beyond the call of duty. There's been so many examples historically of how loyal they've been to the United States. So now they're in a position to actually say, now that we've proven our loyalty, I'd like to show how we bring value in terms of our own history here and in terms of our descendancy in Italy.
What brought you back? What made you return to your roots as an Italian American and bring your overall wealth of experience to this cause as an entrepreneur, and as specifically an entrepreneur who wants to dedicate himself to the arts, but also to the promotion of culture and finding unity among groups? Mm-hmm. What made you return to that?
Well, it's almost like return is almost the wrong word, because there was a connection to it at a relatively early age, and there's certain people in my life who should be cloned for playing this role so that they could play this role for others. My mother, for instance, at a young age, would point to the people on TV or in the newspaper who were Italian or Italian American and their particular achievement or positive contribution in the past or present, right, at that time, right? And then there was, and it might have even been, I remember even her putting me in front of the TV and introducing me to Italian arias when Luciano Pavarotti sang them, right? Pavarotti sang them, and those things really fascinated me.
And always resonated.
It always resonated with
you.
Me. Right, exactly. So the thing is, then at some point, my interest in kind of bringing Italian Americans together in a social atmosphere, but I wanted to combine that with having, and not just Italian Americans, but people who are interested in Italian culture, combine the social and the cultural, where the social stuff in the food is kind of a pleasant sidebar, but you have this substantive cultural conversation, a great guest speaker. It had to be a great guest speaker, an interesting Q&A, and at the same time it remains kind of a really friendly and communal, kind of a front stoop environment, because I still had fond memories of the front stoop in the Bronx, right? So it's almost like making it down to earth and not pretentious, right?
And as we approach the end of the show, I have one more question for you. I'm very curious about what's on your bucket list as an entrepreneur who does this type of different work for the community. Very important, very interesting, but no.
Yeah, sure. You know, that question reminds me of my the question that's in the back of my business card, which is sort of an alliteration. Are you a nonprofit, cultural organization, or business looking for fame, friends, or funds? And so the idea is that you're looking to market yourself for fundraising. So on my bucket list, where I'd like to apply that question is, help get people interested in the history of Italian Harlem as an immigrant community and all the lessons that could be learned about political reform or education reform and political accountability in the public sector. Then there's the idea that I've learned from the 1% for Culture, the idea that you have to invest more infrastructure and resources in immigrant communities in order to totally leverage the fact that there are cultural tourists who would like to visit those communities, and also it also empowers and instills pride in the immigrant communities. Then I'd like to promote the artists, and a lot of those artists are in the immigrant communities through, for instance, an entity called Local Talent Connect, which is trying to develop a social networking hub for artists. And finally, I'd like to promote the idea that it's sustainable to have events that promote, say, books and literature and the arts, while also having networking and socializing attached to it, so that people can both become educated with something substantive and at the same time have fun and build a sense of community.
And create a network.
And create a network, exactly.
And we're just right at the end of the show. Thank you for being with us.
And thank you for having me.
And to all of our friends at home, thank you for watching.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I'm an American.
I am an American. I'm an American.
I am an American.
I am an American. I am an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I'm an American.
I am an American.
I
am
An American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I am American.
I am America.
I'm an American.
I'm an American.
I'm an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
I'm an American.
I am an American.
I am an American.
Thank you.